Everything will be okay.
Doctor, thank goodness you're here. I didn't know if you could come and see me in such short notice.
Hold on a minute. Your eyes appear to be normal. Let me check your forehead. You do feel a little bit feverish. Can you tell me, sir, how have you felt over the last 24 hours?
I've really felt nervous, and I'm constantly having this feeling of tension and suspense, and I have this really strange cough.
Let me have a look here. After looking and reviewing your symptoms, has led me to conclude that you have colored cube disease. Unfortunately, it's quite bad and it's been going around the community. Some people are saying it's the next epidemic.
What should I do, Doctor?
Sir, the treatment that I recommend is to take the following 4 prescribed actions. Firstly, take these city cards with you. Next, follow the white line on this map to the nearest city. Then, trade in one of your cards to build a research station there. And finally, swap 5 cards of the same color to cure your disease. Once you complete those 4 actions, you shall feel fine and dandy.
But Doc, this doesn't really help me. Where did you get your degree from? The bottom of a cereal box?
You can thank me later, sir. I get most of my medical advice from this board game, Pandemic.
Pandemic is a fully cooperative board game where players take on the roles of various medical professionals as they go around the globe and they battle epidemics and outbreaks to ultimately prevent a pandemic from occurring. Players race against the clock and make very, very crucial decisions, as every decision that they make has an effect on the future of humanity.
Pandemic is a fully cooperative game. It is designed by Matt Leacock and published by Z-Man Games. Each game takes about 45 minutes. It's for 2 to 4 players and recommended for ages 8 and over.
The aim of the game is to work together to research and find a cure for the 4 disease types that are shown on the board before a worldwide pandemic occurs.
There are 7 role cards provided in the game Pandemic, and each role card provides each player with a unique set of abilities that can give them an advantage in the game. To set up a game of Pandemic, place the outbreak marker on the 0 space of the outbreaks track and the 4 cure markers blank side up on the spaces shown. Next, place the infection marker on the first space on the infection rate track. Shuffle the infection deck and place it in the infection deck space. Flip over the first 3 cards of the infection deck, placing 3 cubes of that city's respective color on the map. So place 3 cubes in Miami, 3 cubes in Montreal, and 3 cubes in Beijing. So flip over the next 3 infection cards and place 2 cubes of each of that city's respective color on the world map. So place 2 cubes on St. Petersburg, 2 cubes on Istanbul, and 2 cubes on Chicago. Finally, flip over the last 3 cards, Johannesburg, Baghdad, and Cairo, and place 1 cube of that city's respective color on the world map. There should now be 18 cubes altogether on the board. These cubes represent the current global infection, so their cards are placed in the discard pile. Provide each player with a player aid card, then shuffle the roll cards and allocate 1 roll card to each person. Place the player's pawn and its respective color on the Atlanta City space. This serves as a starting point for all players in the game. Go through the player deck and remove all of the epidemic cards so that only the city and event cards remain. Once the cards have been separated into an epidemic pile and a player deck pile, Deal the following number of cards to each player. For a 2-player game, deal out 4 cards per person. 3-player game, 3 cards. 4-player game, 2 cards per person. As a group, select the level of difficulty that you wish to play the game. 4 epidemic cards is easy. Add 5 epidemic cards for a standard mode, or 6 epidemic cards for extremely difficult mode. Break the shuffled player cards into the number of piles based on your group's selected level of difficulty, and shuffle 1 epidemic card into each deck individually. Finally, stack each shuffled deck on top of each other on the player deck space on the map, starting with the thinnest pile and progressively moving your way through to the thickest pile on top. Each player's turn follows the following play sequence. Take 4 actions, draw 2 cards and infect cities. Players are encouraged to discuss options and work together to make decisions. Players can take up to 4 actions on their turn in the game from the following list. Drive or take a ferry from a city to an adjacent city via a connecting line. Take a direct flight by discarding a city card from their hand and moving their pawn to that city. Players can take a charter flight by discarding a city card of a city a player is in to move anywhere they would like on the board. Players can take a shuttle flight by moving their pawn to any other research station on the board. Players can build a research station by discarding a city card that matches a city a player is in. Players can treat a disease by removing 1 cube from a city space. If a disease has been completely cured, remove all cubes from the city space. Players can share knowledge by giving or receiving a city card of the city both players are in. Finally, players can discover a cure by discarding 5 cards of the disease colour at any research station. Move the disease vial over the disease in the disease space on the board. An example of a player's turn could be, I could discard a Madrid card to then take my pawn to fly to Madrid. That would be 1 action. On my second action I could move to New York, and my final 2 actions could be to take off 2 of these blue cubes. Once a player has finished their 4 actions, they draw 2 cards from the player deck. If they receive an event card, they can keep that and use that at any time, even on another player's turn. If they receive an epidemic card, then you need to resolve the epidemic immediately. In each epidemic, the players increase the infection rate by 1 space. They infect a new city by drawing from the bottom of the infection deck pile and placing 3 cubes on that city. Players intensify the virility of the disease by shuffling only the cards in the discard pile of the infection deck and then placing them on top of the infection deck so that they can be redrawn. In a rare case where a player draws 2 epidemic cards on their turn, both epidemic cards are resolved separately. Once resolved, epidemic cards are removed from the game. After all epidemics have been resolved, players discard their hands so that they only have a maximum of 7 cards. When placing cubes on the board, if a city already has cubes on it and you need to place more cubes beyond the maximum value of 3 cubes, then an outbreak occurs. You don't place a cube on the city with 3 cubes on it. However, what you do is place 1 disease cube on every connected line connected to that city. So that means I would place 1 on Miami, 1 on Mexico City, 1 on Sao Paulo, 1 on Buenos Aires, and 1 on Lima, Peru. For every outbreak that occurs, you move the outbreak marker 1 space forward. In some circumstances, when placing cubes on the board, it can actually cause a chain outbreak. So for example, if I had to place a 4th cube onto Miami, that would cause an outbreak by placing a cube in Washington, Atlanta, and Mexico City, and then placing a cube in Bogota. But because Bogota already has 3 cubes, another outbreak would occur and an extra cube will be placed on every adjacent city connected to Bogota. Finally, on the 3rd step, players infect cities. So what they do is they turn over the number of infection cards based on the infection rate and then place 1 disease cube of that city's colour onto the board. Players win the game if all 4 diseases are cured. They do not need to all be eradicated. Players lose the game if the outbreak marker reaches the skull space. A player cannot draw 2 cards from the player deck, or you simply run out of cubes to place onto the board.
There's lots to admire about the game Pandemic. First of all, it's an excellent gateway game for all those people who are trying to delve into the board gaming hobby and the board gaming community. So this is a really good recommendation for people approaching a new and deeper thinking board game for the first time. Second thing is that the game has this great level of suspense and tension all the way throughout, and that every decision that the players make as a group is critical and is important for progressing and improving your status in the game. For every decision that you make incorrectly, the game takes one-hand advantage over the group, and that makes for really strategic planning and strategic thinking. The mechanism for shuffling the discard pile of the infection deck and placing it back on top of the infection deck makes the game work really well in terms of a thematic sense, because more people are getting infected, the infection is spreading in that particular area, and the government is working together as a group to try and control and prevent that disease from spreading. There are a few limitations that I'm going to talk about. First of all, the game itself can lend itself to one player dominating the group in terms of the decision making, and that any new players who've come to the game, or players who are a little bit quieter, often take a back seat role and often don't get their voice heard in terms of a decision that is to be made by a group. So I guess when playing with a mixed group of experienced people, it's really important to establish some clear rules for the decision making process. That way everyone's on the same page, and that way the experience is a little bit fairer for all the players involved. The second thing is that the story in this game is quite lacking. So after you've played this game quite a few times, it can feel like you're just moving a pawn, you're clearing the cubes, you're moving the pawn, you're clearing the cubes, you're moving the pawn, clearing the cubes, and occasionally trading a card with another player, building a research station, or curing a disease. So it can get a little bit repetitive and tiresome after some time, especially after 20 or 30 plays. Also, the role cards themselves, despite the beautiful artwork, they don't really serve any thematic sense in terms of uncovering a story or uncovering a little bit more about the background to that character. They serve more of a mechanical role than a flavor-based role in this game. So it really serves as giving each player a special ability that they contribute to the game. Before I get into the discussion point section of my review, it's important to highlight that Pandemic has a plethora of expansion packs out there. There's On the Brink, In the Lab, State of Emergency, and there's the most recent release, which is Pandemic Legacy, where it's a consumable campaign-based game where players play month by month in order to achieve certain goals and go through a particular story, which is really exciting. So in saying that, some of the discussion points are going to be covered in those expansion sets. My first point is that there is immense educational value for this board game. It builds a sense of cooperation, trust, honesty, responsibility, and also allows the people playing the game, especially if you're playing with your family or a group of students, a sense of communication, fine-tuning those talking and listening skills, and taking on leadership roles, especially if it's your turn in the game. It's just kind of like a soccer game, really. Each player has their role and their role to fulfill and their contribution or special attribute that they can contribute to the game, which makes for a very fun and educationally rich learning experience. Not only that, you're working scientifically, working mathematically, where you're predicting where a disease might come up next, and if you're looking at probability, if it's in the infection discard pile, what is the probability that we will see that disease again in that particular city or in that particular continent. It's really good for teaching world geography, although some of the location places, I'm not sure if they're entirely accurate, but at least they've got the continents right. It's a really great platform for discussing all of those interesting scientific topics about epidemiology and world health, and seeing the role of the World Health Organization in all of this. As you can see, I'm quite excited by the topic and the theme. In considering my final verdict for the game Pandemic is a very fun and rich and immersive experience, and it's a really excellent game for introducing people to the board game world. It ensures that every decision you make in the game counts, And there's a lot of ways to lose, so that raises the fun factor and the replayability factor. So this is a game that I definitely recommend, and especially if you're looking to go into the expansion packs, this is a great starting point. If you'd like to check out my verdict, please stay tuned after the video. Otherwise, this is Danny. Thank you very much for joining me for another episode of Board Game Sanctuary. Bye!